Chapter 1: The Whisper of Herodotus. In the 5th century BCE, when Herodotus journeyed to Egypt, he came as more than a chronicler. He was a collector of wonders, a seeker of accounts that hovered between the credible and the fantastic. As he stood among the limestone colonnades of ancient Memphis, local guides unfolded a story older than the city itself. They spoke of a labyrinth so immense that even he, accustomed to the scale of Pharaoh's monuments, could scarcely grasp its measure. Herodotus would later write that this labyrinth surpassed even the pyramids in grandeur, a claim that echoed through generations of readers who struggled to imagine any construction more astonishing than the great tombs themselves. The historian recorded that 12 courts roofed with stone surrounded countless chambers, some above ground, others sunk into the earth. He was told that these subterranean halls housed the tombs of kings and sacred crocodiles. Though Herodotus was permitted to walk the upper galleries, the lower levels were forbidden to all but priests. His account described columned passages, walls inscribed with reliefs, and doors that led endlessly into one another, as though the labyrinth were a city built to defeat all comprehension. When he returned to Greece, he carried these impressions with him, part observation, part hearsay, stitched into his histories. From that moment, the labyrinth entered the record of Western imagination, no longer just a local legend but a phenomenon attested by the father of history himself. Yet even in antiquity, skepticism shadowed Herodotus's words. Some contemporaries believed he had exaggerated, mistaking smaller complexes or temple foundations for a hidden empire of corridors. Others suspected he had never seen any part of it at all, instead repeating whatever stories the priests chose to tell him. Over the centuries, the question of the labyrinth's authenticity became a riddle in its own right. Later writers, Diodorus, Strabo, and Pliny, echoed parts of the account while quietly amending or omitting the details that seemed too extravagant to credit. They could not decide whether the labyrinth was a single structure or a poetic description of many, fused by memory and retelling. What lent Herodotus's claim a persistent power was the specificity of his vision. He did not merely say there were chambers underground. He counted the courts, described the pillars, and insisted the craftsmanship surpassed everything else he had witnessed. This precision made it more difficult to dismiss his words as pure invention. Even when later expeditions failed to uncover such halls, scholars were reluctant to discard his testimony outright. They argued that erosion, looting, or the Nile's flooding might have buried the labyrinth beyond recovery. Each failed excavation only deepened the sense that the truth lay just beneath the threshold of discovery. As centuries passed, Egypt itself underwent transformations as complete as any myth. Dynasties fell, conquerors arrived, and the language of the inscriptions shifted from hieroglyph to Coptic to Arabic. Yet the story of the labyrinth endured, flickering in manuscripts copied in distant monasteries. Medieval geographers and pilgrims repeated the old rumor that below the sands lay an archive of knowledge and power. Some Islamic chroniclers, writing long after Herodotus, adapted the legend to their own cosmologies, describing subterranean treasuries sealed by King Solomon or vaults that guarded scriptures from the dawn of the world. In each retelling, the labyrinth grew less architectural and more symbolic. It became a place where all secrets converged, where those who ventured too far might never return. By the early modern period, European antiquarians searching for the origins of civilization revived Herodotus's account as a clue to Egypt's hidden past. Maps and speculative engravings imagined the labyrinth as a grid of corridors extending beneath the entire plateau. The more it evaded proof, the more it attracted curiosity. Renaissance scholars, captivated by the idea that the ancients possessed knowledge now lost, cited the labyrinth as evidence that Egyptian priests had devised ways to conceal wisdom from profane eyes. In this view, the labyrinth was not merely a monument but a deliberate gesture of secrecy, a message to the future that some truths could not be unlocked by conquest alone. Today, historians recognize that Herodotus's report may have been based on what we call the Labyrinth of Ha'era, an immense mortuary temple complex built by Amenemhat III in the 12th dynasty, far south of Giza. Yet even this explanation does not entirely quiet the speculation. For in the centuries after Herodotus, other travelers claimed to have seen structures closer to the pyramids, ruins whose scale matched his description more closely than Hawara's remains. The idea that something yet undiscovered lies beneath the Giza Plateau continues to inspire fringe theories and cautious scholarly inquiry alike. And so, in the very first glimpse the Western world received of Egypt's supposed labyrinth, a paradox took root. The more precise Herodotus's testimony appeared, the harder it became to reconcile with physical evidence. His whisper, preserved in the ink of ancient papyrus, has endured longer than most kingdoms. It is a fragment of history that refuses to resolve into certainty, as though the labyrinth were still fulfilling its purpose, to confound, to conceal, and to beckon those who cannot resist the lure of hidden passageways beneath the desert's golden skin. Chapter 2: Echoes in the Sand. Long after Herodotus laid down his quill, the sands around the pyramids remained silent. The labyrinth, if it existed, left no entrance bold enough to withstand the centuries of shifting dunes and Nile floods. Yet across generations, explorers, scholars, and local storytellers kept alive the possibility that some echo of its chambers survived below the surface. By the 1st century BCE, Greek geographer Strabo arrived in Egypt and added his own observations. He described a labyrinth near Lake Moeris, identifying a colossal stone construction with winding passages and hidden courtyards. Like Herodotus, Strabo recorded the sense that the building was not simply a temple but an archive of hidden knowledge and royal tombs. Over time, however, even the precise location of Strabo's labyrinth blurred into legend. By late antiquity, the sands had buried most of the evidence. Only scattered masonry, half-submerged columns, and fragments of walls hinted that enormous structures once spread across the Fayum and the plateau near the pyramids. In medieval Arab chronicles, the story evolved further. The labyrinth was said to contain vaults filled with ancient scrolls, astrological instruments, and treasures sealed away to protect them from the conquerors who swept through Egypt in succession. These accounts mingled Islamic legends of secret wisdom with older Egyptian myths about the afterlife. In them, the labyrinth became a place not only of hidden chambers but of cosmic significance, a threshold between this world and the realms beyond. Early European travelers to Egypt in the Renaissance period often carried copies of Herodotus's histories tucked beside their religious texts. When they approached the Giza Plateau, they scanned the horizon for any trace of stonework that might confirm the old descriptions. Yet the landscape offered only monumental stillness. The colossal pyramids, the impassive Sphinx, and the eroded remains of causeways whose purpose was difficult to discern. In the absence of clear evidence, artists and chroniclers improvised. Etchings produced in Italian and German workshops imagined the labyrinth as a sprawling matrix of arcades beneath the sands, sometimes extending miles in every direction. These visualizations, though speculative, shaped popular belief and convinced many that a vast hidden structure waited for rediscovery. In the 17th and 18th centuries, as European interest in Egypt grew more systematic, early archaeologists and engineers began measuring, sketching, and cataloging the visible ruins. They dug trenches along the pyramid plateau, hoping to uncover an entrance sealed since the time of the pharaohs. The accounts they brought home described blocks carved with unfamiliar inscriptions, shafts that ended in collapsed chambers, and passages so choked with debris that progress became impossible. Though they never found a definitive labyrinth, their reports often hinted at the tantalizing possibility that one might still exist, only deeper or hidden behind walls yet unbreached. During Napoleon's expedition to Egypt in 1798, teams of scholars known as the savants made the first concerted attempt to document every known monument. Their work, compiled in the monumental description de l'Egypte, catalogued temples, tombs, and pyramids in exhaustive detail. Yet even this effort, which revealed many forgotten structures, failed to verify Herodotus's labyrinth. Napoleon's scholars noted that local guides still spoke of ancient passages buried under the plateau, but the combination of sand, time, and centuries of looting had obliterated any clear entrance. In their careful prose, one can sense both frustration and wonder. How could so grand a monument simply vanish? By the 19th century, as Egyptology emerged as a discipline, the story took on a new dimension. Scholars debated whether the labyrinth described by classical authors had ever stood near Giza at all. Some argued that the complex at Hawara, discovered and partly excavated by Flinders Petrie in 1888, fit many of the descriptions: the vast courtyards, the bewildering corridors, the hidden tombs beneath the floors. Petrie's methodical work revealed an immense plan, hundreds of chambers and colonnades, supporting the idea that Herodotus's guides had shown him the Hawara labyrinth rather than anything under the pyramids themselves. Still, not everyone agreed that the mystery was resolved. The Hawara ruins, impressive though they were, lacked certain features mentioned in the ancient texts. The Greek writers described colossal stone roofs, whole ceilings of polished marble, and decorative reliefs of astonishing variety. In the debris Petrie uncovered, most of those elements were missing or too fragmentary to match the vivid ancient accounts. As a result, the belief that a separate labyrinth might lie beneath Giza retained its hold on popular imagination. Authors and explorers alike argued that the complex at Hawara might have inspired the legend but was not its sole source. Even today, satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and remote sensing technologies have revealed anomalies, rectilinear patterns, and voids under the plateau that have sparked speculation. Some researchers interpret these signals as evidence of man-made structures still buried far below the visible layers. Others caution that natural fractures in the bedrock can produce deceptively regular patterns. No consensus has yet emerged. Instead, each new study fuels the same question that haunted Herodotus's earliest readers. If such a place existed, how could it have disappeared so completely? So the echo of the labyrinth persists, carried forward by every new generation of explorers who walk the perimeter of the pyramids and wonder whether beneath the world's most famous tombs lies an even older secret. In the dry hush of the desert wind, one can almost imagine the corridors waiting, their stones sealed in darkness, ready to confound and astonish all who dare to follow the whispers into the sand.
Chapter 3: Beneath the Stones. It is one thing to read of buried wonders, quite another to stand on the plateau itself and feel the invisible weight of what might lie below. For centuries, pilgrims, conquerors, and scholars have looked up at the pyramids in awe, scarcely imagining that their feet rested on ground, concealing further mysteries. Even in antiquity, the Egyptians themselves believed that hidden chambers existed below their monuments, places where the earth folded around secrets too powerful or sacred for ordinary eyes. The Giza Plateau, despite its familiarity, has always been riddled with unseen spaces, shafts carved for burial, storage chambers, unfinished tunnels that meander for no obvious purpose. Each of these voids hints at the possibility of something more, something still waiting to be found. Modern archaeology has mapped many of the accessible cavities beneath the plateau. Some are well known. The subterranean chamber beneath the Great Pyramid, its floor left rough and unfinished, perhaps abandoned when the builders chose a higher burial chamber. Others are more obscure. Vertical shafts lined with limestone, narrow passages that end in abrupt dead ends, corridors partly collapsed and filled with rubble. Even when these spaces have been cleared and measured, their purpose often remains uncertain. Was a shaft an escape route for the spirit of the king, a symbolic passage for rituals, or merely a practical feature of construction? Interpretations multiply with each discovery, weaving a tapestry of conjecture that no single theory can fully encompass. In the late 20th century, technological advances offered new ways to peer beneath the surface. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted around the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid revealed anomalies, patterns in the bedrock that did not match the natural geology. These signals suggested voids of considerable size, their precise shape and contents unknown. Some researchers argued that such anomalies might be natural fissures. Others believed they were the entrances to undiscovered chambers. Because excavation on the Giza Plateau requires careful permissions and international oversight, few of these voids have been explored. The result is an uneasy balance between restraint and curiosity. Scientists acknowledge the need to protect fragile structures from damage. Yet the desire to know remains as powerful as it was in Herodotus's time. One of the most tantalizing possibilities is that if a labyrinth existed beneath Giza, it might have been deliberately sealed. In ancient Egypt, secrecy was an art form. Tomb builders concealed corridors with false doors and hidden plugs of stone. When necessary, entire passageways were packed with masonry to frustrate robbers and preserve the sanctity of the tomb. If the labyrinth described in classical sources had been filled and disguised, even modern instruments might struggle to distinguish it from solid rock. Such speculation fuels a quiet conviction among some Egyptologists that the last word on Giza's subterranean architecture has yet to be written. Historical records offer scattered references to underground spaces connected with the pyramids. The Roman author Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, observed that the pyramids were filled within with labyrinths of passages to exhaust all curiosity. Though he provided no evidence to support this assertion, it echoes Herodotus's earlier claims and reinforces the notion that subterranean complexity was accepted as fact by many ancient writers. Whether they were describing the same labyrinth or projecting their own expectations onto the monuments is impossible to say. Yet their voices, insistent across the centuries, have shaped how generations envision what might lie beneath the sand. In the 1990s, a Japanese archaeological team used remote sensing to study the area south of the Great Pyramid. Their surveys indicated the presence of significant voids aligned in a pattern suggestive of man-made construction. While these findings were preliminary, they added fuel to the idea that a labyrinth, or something like it, could still be concealed below. Later surveys by Egyptian and Western teams produced similar results, mapping a tangle of anomalies whose interpretation remains fiercely debated. Some Egyptologists dismiss the patterns as geological formations, but others insist they are too regular to be natural. Until excavation proceeds, the question remains open. Beyond the technical investigations, folklore continues to sustain the legend. Local guides recount stories of hidden entrances swallowed by drifting dunes, of explorers who disappeared while searching for buried passages. Though such tales are impossible to verify, they form part of the cultural landscape that has kept the labyrinth alive in popular imagination. In this way, the boundary between history and myth grows porous, each reinforcing the other. To stand in the heat at the pyramid's base and listen to these accounts is to feel that the past is still whispering beneath one's feet. Perhaps that is why, despite centuries of exploration, the idea of a subterranean labyrinth refuses to fade. Each generation inherits not only the measured reports of archaeologists, but also the glimmering fragments of stories, handed down like relics. They speak of corridors echoing in darkness, chambers sealed before the first dynasty fell, and knowledge that might yet change how we understand the ancients. In the hush beneath the stones, something seems to persist, a promise or a warning that what we see is only the beginning of the tale. Chapter 4: The Labyrinth of Hira. Before the modern fascination with hidden chambers beneath the Giza pyramids took hold, scholars seeking the origins of the labyrinth legend turned their attention south, to a place known in antiquity as Hira. Situated in the Fayum Depression, not far from the edge of the desert, Hira was the site of a mortuary temple built by Pharaoh Amenemhat III of the 12th dynasty. Unlike the soaring pyramids at Giza, this pyramid had lost much of its casing and grandeur over the millennia. Yet beside its sprawled ruins so extensive that even in their shattered state they dwarfed many other temples. Here, many Egyptologists believe, lay the original inspiration for Herodotus's description. Strabo, visiting centuries after the labyrinth's construction, described a bewildering complex of interlocking rooms and corridors. He claimed there were more than 1,500 chambers, half above ground, half below. The upper rooms served as public halls and administrative offices. The subterranean ones were reserved for royal tombs and sacred rites. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, spoke of columns carved from single blocks and roofs of massive stone slabs. Even in decay, he insisted, the labyrinth's remains inspired awe. By the 19th century, European scholars and explorers had begun to speculate that Hoira was the labyrinth of legend. In 1888, the British archaeologist Flinders Petrie launched an excavation of the site. He approached it with a discipline and precision that would become hallmarks of modern Egyptology. As his workers peeled back centuries of debris, the scale of the complex gradually emerged. Petrie recorded walls of limestone and mud brick, column bases aligned in rows, and passageways whose purpose remained uncertain. While much of the superstructure had been dismantled, likely quarried for later construction, the foundations confirmed that this was no ordinary temple. Petrie's findings revealed the labyrinth's immense footprint, a rectangle nearly 300 meters long and over 200 meters wide. The ground plan suggested a grid of courts and halls, once connected by doorways and corridors that must have created a sense of deliberate confusion. The builder's intent seemed clear, to humble and disorient any visitor who dared to cross the threshold. Even the partial plan Petrie reconstructed was enough to persuade many scholars that Herodotus's informants had described Hoira, and that the legends of a labyrinth beneath the Giza Plateau arose from later embellishments. Yet the ruins left room for doubt. Many of the features Herodotus recorded, such as the polished marble ceilings and the lavish reliefs, were missing or only faintly suggested by fragments. The subterranean chambers, so vividly described by ancient authors, proved elusive. Petrie discovered some tomb shafts and burial corridors beneath the temple floor, but their arrangement did not match the symmetrical plan in classical texts. This discrepancy fed the belief that while Hoira might be the primary source of the labyrinth legend, it was not the only one. Perhaps later storytellers grafted other traditions, real or imagined, onto Herodotus's account, mingling Hoira's grandeur with tales of hidden vaults under Giza. Over time, the idea that Hoira held the key to the labyrinth's origins took hold in academic circles. Yet in the popular imagination, Giza continued to exert a stronger pull. The pyramid's silhouette against the sky, their aura of mystery, and their enduring fame made them a natural focus for speculation. Even when scholars published measured arguments favoring Hoira, popular writers persisted in linking the labyrinth to the more iconic site. It was as if the grandeur of Giza demanded its own subterranean counterpart. Meanwhile, Hoira itself has never ceased to attract those drawn to the idea of lost chambers and hidden knowledge. In the 20th and 21st centuries, teams returned to the site, applying modern survey techniques and ground-penetrating radar. Their work confirmed the vast scale of the foundation walls and suggested that some passages remained unexplored beneath layers of debris. Yet no discovery has definitively reconciled the differences between what Herodotus claimed to have seen and what the archaeology reveals. As so often happens in Egypt, the material evidence and the literary testimony run along parallel paths, sometimes converging, sometimes diverging, never quite settling into a single, clear narrative. Some Egyptologists have proposed that the labyrinth of Hoira was less a place of secret rites and more an administrative center. The multitude of rooms, they argue, might have housed archives, tax records, and the offices of priests and officials. In this interpretation, the labyrinth's confusion was intentional but practical, a way to protect vital documents and treasures by enclosing them in a maze of halls. Others hold that the symbolic purpose was paramount, that the complexity was meant to reflect cosmic order or the soul's journey through the afterlife. These perspectives do not cancel each other. Rather, they underscore how ancient monuments could serve many functions at once. As the debate continues, Hoira occupies a curious place in the story of the labyrinth. It is both the most tangible candidate and the most incomplete. Its foundations remain visible, its outlines measurable, its artifacts cataloged. Yet its upper structures have vanished almost entirely, erasing the architectural details that might have confirmed Herodotus's every word. For this reason, Hoera stands as a reminder of how history often teeters between evidence and imagination. No excavation can recover every vanished stone, just as no manuscript can capture every truth. The labyrinth, whether under the Fayum or beneath Giza, endures precisely because it resists certainty. It offers a space into which each generation projects its own questions, a silence that answers only with more mystery. Chapter 5. The Seal of the Pharaohs. Among the many theories about Egypt's labyrinthine structures, one motif recurs with persistent force: the conviction that the labyrinth was not simply a feat of architecture, but a seal imposed by the pharaohs themselves. To the ancient Egyptian mind, a tomb or a temple was never merely a building. It was an instrument for containing and transforming power, political, religious, and cosmic. The sealing of hidden spaces was a ritual act as much as a practical one, ensuring that what lay within remained inviolate across millennia. In the case of a labyrinth, some believe this imperative of concealment explains why so little has survived in forms we can clearly read. Evidence from other Egyptian monuments shows how determined the builders could be to thwart intrusion. The pyramids of the Old Kingdom were designed with false corridors, sliding blocks, and secret chambers. Tombs in the Valley of the Kings were filled with rubble to disguise their true extent. Even in temples accessible to the public, inner sanctuaries were closed behind multiple doorways, each threshold marking a new level of restricted access. If the labyrinth described by Herodotus existed near Giza, its creators would have had every incentive to protect it with similar measures. The notion that such a structure could remain hidden for centuries is not as far-fetched as it first seems. Ancient inscriptions refer to the concept of the house of millions of years, a phrase that suggests the aspiration to endurance beyond any human reckoning. Some Egyptologists interpret the labyrinth as a monumental expression of this idea, a complex not only built for administrative or ceremonial purposes, but designed to outlast dynasties. In this view, the maze-like plan was a deliberate strategy, a kind of living testament to the pharaoh's capacity to shape the world and confound all who came later. Each corridor was an assertion of authority, each sealed door a declaration that knowledge and power would remain in royal hands. The question of what exactly the labyrinth sealed remains open. According to later Hellenistic sources, the underground chambers were said to house royal burials, including mummies of pharaohs from the earliest dynasties. Others claim that sacred animals, crocodiles in particular, were interred there, preserved as incarnations of divine forces. Some Arab chroniclers, writing centuries after Egypt had become part of the Islamic world, insisted that the labyrinth contained vaults of ancient books, astronomical instruments, and formulas for controlling nature itself. While such claims are impossible to verify, they illustrate the symbolic freight carried by any sealed Egyptian monument. What was hidden there was assumed to be precious, potent, and possibly dangerous. If we return to the specific case of Hoera, Flinders Petrie's excavations in the late 19th century uncovered burial shafts beneath the labyrinth's floors, confirming that some funerary purpose was entwined with the building's design. Yet even Petrie found no evidence of the lavish interments described in the classical texts. Many of the tombs had been plundered in antiquity. Their treasures, if they existed, had vanished long before modern archaeologists arrived. In the case of Giza, the subterranean chambers beneath the pyramids had likewise been emptied, leaving behind only traces, fragments of stone vessels, shards of pottery, graffiti left by ancient workmen. The emptiness of these spaces poses a question that no scholar has conclusively answered. Were the tombs and labyrinths looted centuries ago, or were they intentionally sealed in a way that has kept their most vital contents hidden still? In the 20th century, as Egyptology matured into a rigorous academic discipline, a cautious consensus began to emerge. Many scholars argued that while the Labyrinth of Herodotus almost certainly referred to Hora, the legends of hidden spaces under Giza reflected a combination of later myths and misunderstandings. Yet this consensus never fully satisfied those who felt the Giza plateau still guarded deeper secrets. In their view, the very absence of evidence constituted a kind of negative proof. If the pharaohs had succeeded in sealing something away, centuries of excavation might still have failed to uncover it. The tension between what is known and what is imagined continues to shape the labyrinth story. Satellite imagery, ground surveys, and radar scans have all revealed anomalies, voids and patterns below the plateau that invite speculation. Each time an unexplained cavity is discovered, the idea that the labyrinth was real receives another flicker of validation. Yet these technological glimpses rarely yield clear answers. A radar shadow can as easily be a fissure in the bedrock as the entrance to a lost complex. A linear feature in satellite imagery might be a buried wall, or merely the ghost of an ancient quarry. This ambiguity is both the frustration and the allure of studying Egypt's sealed monuments. To consider the labyrinth as a seal rather than just a structure is to appreciate how Egyptian builders thought in layers. A pyramid or temple was only the visible aspect of a more complex reality, whose deeper strata were hidden deliberately. What appears to us as an absence, a lost record, a vanished room, may have been the ultimate expression of power. The capacity to command not only what would be built, but what would be remembered or forgotten. When Herodotus first heard the story of a labyrinth larger than any other construction, he was listening to the echo of that ambition. The builders who conceived it were working on a scale that defies ordinary comprehension, seeking not just to impress, but to endure, to render their secrets impervious to time. And so, whether one stands amid the ruined courts of Hora or on the broad limestone causeways of Giza, the sense persists that something more lies hidden, sealed by intentions no modern science can fully decipher. The labyrinth's legend endures because it is more than a story of walls and passages. It is a testament to humanity's oldest desire, to build something that will never surrender its mysteries. Chapter 6: The Pilgrims and the Chroniclers. Long after the last pharaoh had been laid to rest, and Egypt became a province of foreign empires, travelers continued to come, drawn by the aura of the monuments. Pilgrims, merchants, and chroniclers alike crossed seas and deserts to stand before the pyramids and hear the stories whispered among the local guides. For them, the labyrinth was never simply a ruin to be measured. It was a legend woven into Egypt's identity, an emblem of the uncanny skill of its builders and the inexhaustible depths of its past. As the centuries passed, accounts multiplied, some precise, some fanciful, each adding new layers to a tradition that would not die. The earliest Christian pilgrims, traveling from the Roman Empire in the 4th and 5th centuries, left brief references to vast structures near the Fayum in Giza. They described underground vaults and colonnaded courts so large that even in decay, they inspired awe. These writers did not always distinguish between the labyrinth of Amenemhat III and the tombs beneath the pyramids. Instead, they spoke of the labyrinth as a collective phenomenon, the sum of all hidden spaces under Egypt's sands. In their minds, these places were linked by more than physical proximity. They shared an aura of mystery that seemed to set them apart from every other land they knew. Later Arab chroniclers adopted and expanded these accounts. Authors such as al-Makrizi and al-Idrisi compiled reports from travelers, blending observation with inherited legend. Some claimed that the labyrinth contained thousands of rooms, each inscribed with knowledge from before the flood. Others spoke of doors sealed with a kind of alchemical cement, resistant to fire and water. In some versions, the passages were patrolled by spirits or jinn, charged with protecting the secrets within. Such descriptions, while improbable, reflect a profound respect for Egypt's antiquity, a sense that its builders had mastered arts now lost to the world. These chroniclers also offered practical explanations for the labyrinth's purpose. Some believed it was a royal archive, safeguarding records of dynastic succession, harvests, and celestial events. Others suggested it was a treasury, a place where the wealth of the pharaohs was stored beyond the reach of conquerors. A few proposed that it functioned as an initiatory maze. Those who passed through its corridors were tested in courage and wisdom before gaining access to the innermost sanctuaries. Though these theories varied wildly, they shared an assumption that the labyrinth was more than a tomb. It was an institution, a mechanism for transmitting power and knowledge across generations. In medieval Europe, as trade with the Islamic world revived contact with classical texts, the labyrinth legend took on a new life. Translations of Herodotus and Pliny reached scholars in Italy, France, and England, who incorporated these tales into their own compendia of wonders. Artists and mapmakers illustrated the labyrinth in extravagant detail, imagining it as a vast grid of vaults stretching beneath the pyramids and connecting them to each other. These visions had little basis in excavated evidence, but they satisfied a deep hunger for marvels that animated European curiosity about Egypt. By the Renaissance, the labyrinth had become part of a broader fascination with the Egyptian mysteries, a term that encompassed everything from hieroglyphs to alchemy. Philosophers and esoteric writers argued that Egypt's monuments concealed secret doctrines, formulas for transforming the soul, recipes for extending life, diagrams of the cosmos. The labyrinth, in this interpretation, was not merely a building, but a symbol of the journey toward hidden truth. Those who entered its passageways undertook a spiritual quest as much as a physical one. Each threshold represented a trial. Each chamber revealed a new degree of understanding. When European travelers finally arrived in Egypt in greater numbers after Napoleon's campaign, they came equipped with maps, measuring tools, and an expectation of finding the labyrinth as it had been described. What they encountered instead were shattered walls, eroded pylons, and a landscape that bore only fragments of the grand designs in their books. Yet this very absence intensified the allure. If the labyrinth could no longer be seen, perhaps it still lay hidden under layers of drifted sand and the debris of centuries. The failure to find it whole made its legend stronger, for it suggested that Egypt guarded its greatest secrets more jealously than any other civilization. In the 19th century, explorers like Giovanni Battista Belzoni and Carl Richard Lepsius tried to reconcile the classical texts with the evidence on the ground. They documented partial plans, sketched half-buried foundations, and debated whether the remains at Hira were enough to account for the legend. Yet even the most thorough investigations left room for speculation. If Herodotus had indeed been shown a labyrinth, had it already begun to decay? Had local guides exaggerated its extent? Or did another, undiscovered structure lie waiting in the deep earth? The pilgrims and chroniclers who carried these stories across continents did more than preserve a record of Egypt's monuments. They created a cultural memory, a shared conviction that under the desert's surface lay an architecture of secrets. Each generation added details, some plausible, some outlandish, until the labyrinth became a kind of palimpsest, layered with the hopes, fears, and fantasies of all who heard of it. This legacy is part of why the labyrinth continues to fascinate. It is not only what the ancients built that matters, but what later ages imagined they built. Today, scholars sift these chronicles with caution, separating credible observation from embellishment. Yet even the most skeptical archaeologist must acknowledge how enduring the legend has proved. Across 2,000 years, the idea of the labyrinth has never entirely receded. It is as if each traveler, standing on the plateau or in the ruins of Hira, could not resist adding another line to the story, a story that, like the labyrinth itself, has no single entrance and no final exit.
Chapter 7: The Quest for Proof. The desire to move beyond rumor and legend has always driven those who study Egypt's monuments. In the case of the labyrinth, that impulse hardened over time into a determined effort to find material proof that would resolve the question once and for all. Beginning in the 19th century, expeditions sought not only to map what was visible, but to pierce the layers of concealment that time and human activity had laid down over millennia. For these explorers, scholars, and engineers, the labyrinth was no longer merely a tale to be recounted. It was a test of whether the modern age could conquer the secrets the ancients had so carefully guarded. Among the earliest attempts to anchor the labyrinth, in fact, were the surveys conducted by European teams in the Fayum. Flinders Petrie, whose work at Ha'era remains foundational, combined meticulous measurement with a clear-eyed recognition that much had been lost beyond recovery. He documented the immense footprint of the complex, recording walls and column bases that extended far beyond any surviving superstructure. Yet even Petrie, whose devotion to evidence was unmatched, admitted that the ruins could not fully explain the scale and grandeur described by classical authors. It was as if a blueprint existed in some parallel dimension, one that could only be glimpsed through the scattered remnants. Over the following decades, as Egypt's monuments became the focus of ever more sophisticated archaeology, the labyrinth remained an object of speculation. New tools promised new clarity. Aerial photography revealed subtle contours in the desert surface, the faint traces of buried foundations. Ground-penetrating radar sent pulses into the earth, mapping anomalies that suggested hidden cavities. Magnetometry, resistivity surveys, and seismic readings each produced their own patterns, tantalizing in their implications but never quite definitive. The technology advanced, yet the question stayed maddeningly open. Did these signals point to the labyrinth, or to something else entirely? At Giza, similar efforts unfolded. The plateau was already one of the most studied archaeological sites in the world, but researchers could not ignore the possibility that unexcavated spaces still lay below. In the 1970s and 1980s, Egyptian and foreign teams collaborated on limited excavations and non-invasive surveys. These projects confirmed that networks of shafts and chambers did exist under the pyramids. Some were well documented, like the unfinished subterranean chamber beneath Khufu's pyramid. Others were more ambiguous. Voids and cavities whose dimensions did not match any known structure. Though no evidence emerged of a labyrinth on the scale Herodotus described, the mere presence of unexplained spaces kept the hope alive. By the late 20th century, the dream of locating the labyrinth had become an intersection of science, folklore, and media. Documentaries portrayed the search in terms almost mythic, with radar images and sonar scans presented as if they were glimpses of another reality, waiting to be unveiled. Popular books proposed theories that span the plausible and the fantastical. Hidden libraries of ancient wisdom, repositories of unknown technologies, even tunnels stretching to distant pyramids. While professional archaeologists cautioned against drawing conclusions too quickly, the public imagination remained captivated. Each new survey seemed to promise that the next revelation was just around the corner. In 2008, renewed attention focused on Ha'era when Egyptian authorities announced a fresh effort to document the site with advanced ground-penetrating radar. The resulting data again revealed extensive anomalies, consistent with the foundations of monumental architecture. Some researchers interpreted the results as confirmation that the labyrinth's underground chambers were more extensive than previously believed. Yet others insisted that until excavations verified the radar images, any claim of rediscovery remained speculative. Once more, the boundary between evidence and aspiration proved remarkably thin. The quest for proof has also confronted a persistent tension: the need to balance exploration with preservation. The very techniques capable of locating hidden structures can also threaten them. Excavation, especially in areas where the water table has risen or the ground has been weakened by centuries of looting, carries real risks. As a result, Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities has often opted for caution, prioritizing conservation over intrusive digging. While this policy frustrates those eager to settle the labyrinth question definitively, it reflects a recognition that some mysteries may be safer left undisturbed. Yet the ambition remains. To many scholars, the labyrinth represents a missing piece in the puzzle of how Egyptian civilization conceived of space and power. If it were to be fully documented, It might illuminate not only architectural practices but also religious symbolism, administrative systems, and cultural memory. The corridors and chambers, whether they once held mummies, archives, or ritual objects, could reveal what the pharaohs most valued and feared. In this sense, the labyrinth is more than a structure to be catalogued. It is a key to understanding an entire worldview. As the 21st century unfolds, new tools continue to emerge. Remote sensing satellites can now detect minute variations in ground composition. Artificial intelligence is being trained to analyze radar data and predict likely locations of buried structures. These innovations hold promise, but they also revive the same fundamental question. What will proof look like? A chamber filled with inscriptions? A plan that matches Herodotus's account precisely? Or something stranger? A partial revelation that raises more questions than it answers? No matter how advanced the technology becomes, the labyrinth remains what it has always been, a mirror in which each generation sees its own longing reflected. For some, that longing is the hope of certainty, a clear answer to an ancient riddle. For others, it is the allure of the unknown itself. Perhaps the labyrinth endures precisely because it has never been pinned down, never reduced to mere coordinates on a map. To seek it is to participate in a tradition older than history. The human desire to walk corridors no one else has walked, to find doors no one else has opened. Chapter 8: The Patterns Beneath the Sand. To understand why the labyrinth refuses to be fully revealed, one must first consider the patterns hidden beneath the sands of Egypt. The Giza Plateau and the Fayum Basin share a peculiar quality. Their surfaces appear deceptively barren, yet their subsoil is layered with centuries of construction, erosion, and reuse. Beneath every stretch of limestone and drifted dune lies a palimpsest of human endeavor. Temples built atop older temples, storage galleries overlaid by tombs, quarries repurposed as crypts. In this environment, no single excavation ever yields a clean narrative. Instead, each discovery is entangled with the traces of a dozen other histories. Modern archaeological surveys have come to resemble a kind of forensic investigation. Instruments are calibrated to detect the faintest anomalies, voids in the substrate, disturbances in magnetic fields, minute shifts in soil density. These patterns, rendered in color-coded maps and spectral graphs, are often the only hints that something remarkable might lie below. Yet interpreting them requires an uneasy blend of rigor and conjecture. A rectangular anomaly might be the foundation of a columned hall, or it might be the remnant of a collapsed shaft. A curving line of higher resistance might suggest a hidden corridor, or it could be no more than a geological fault. In this ambiguity, the labyrinth persists as both a promise and a provocation. At Hawera, where Petrie first traced the labyrinth's outline, the patterns beneath the sand have grown only more tantalizing as technology has advanced. Ground-penetrating radar and electrical resistivity imaging have confirmed that the foundations extend well beyond the portions uncovered by 19th-century excavators. Subterranean chambers appear to radiate from the central core of the temple complex, their arrangement consistent with the classical descriptions of interlocking courts and sealed passageways. But each attempt to follow these patterns to their end has run into the same obstacle: the immense deposits of debris and silt accumulated over millennia. To clear even a small area would require not only time and funding but a willingness to disrupt what remains of the visible ruins. At Giza, the situation is more complicated still. Satellite imaging and microgravity surveys have revealed unexpected anomalies beneath the plateau. Some lie adjacent to the known tombs and galleries carved into the bedrock. Others appear in places long assumed to be undisturbed. Each time a new void is identified, speculation surges. Could this be a lost chamber connected to a labyrinthine substructure? Or is it merely a pocket in the limestone, the relic of natural processes? To date, no single anomaly has been confirmed as the entrance to a labyrinth on the scale Herodotus described. Yet, the cumulative effect of these discoveries is undeniable. They remind us how little of Egypt's monumental landscape has been fully mapped or understood. What complicates the search further is the way the ancients themselves modified their environment. quarrying for stone left behind cavities that were later adapted for other uses. Floods from the Nile deposited silt that buried entire courtyards. Earthquakes collapsed vaults whose debris now masks their original shape. Even when a survey produces clean, geometric signals, they must be read against this background of continual transformation. The labyrinth may not have disappeared in a single cataclysm. It may simply have been eroded, scavenged, and reburied in stages, until only its ghost remained in the ground's hidden patterns. Yet these patterns hold a kind of hypnotic allure. They seem to beckon, promising that with enough patience and ingenuity, the puzzle could still be solved. Some researchers argue that the key lies not in any single technology, but in the combination of methods, correlating radar scans with historical maps, testing soil samples for chemical residues, using drone-mounted LiDAR to create microtopographic models. In this vision, the labyrinth is not so much a place to be excavated as a dataset to be assembled, an architecture of information rather than stone. Whether this approach can ever produce the kind of definitive proof that has eluded explorers for centuries remains an open question. Even so, the quest continues. Teams from universities and cultural ministries return season after season, refining their equipment, revising their hypotheses. Each new survey adds another layer of data, another hint of design emerging from the noise. It is a process as incremental as it is uncertain, yet it mirrors the way the labyrinth itself was conceived, as an interlocking system in which no part could be fully understood without reference to the whole. To trace the patterns beneath the sand is to participate in that same spirit of cumulative discovery. If anything, the persistence of these investigations demonstrates how the labyrinth has evolved from a legend into an empirical challenge. For scholars, proving or disproving its existence has become a test of method as much as imagination. For the wider public, each new anomaly reinforces the conviction that somewhere under the Egyptian earth, a door waits to be opened. Perhaps that door leads to a corridor lined with columns. Perhaps it leads only deeper into the unknown. Either way, the patterns remain, silent witnesses to a history that refuses to vanish.
Chapter 9. The Symbolic Labyrinth. While the search for the physical labyrinth has captivated explorers, a parallel tradition has flourished in the realm of symbolism. In this tradition, the labyrinth is not only a structure buried beneath Egyptian sands, but also an idea, a metaphor for the complexity of knowledge and the limits of human understanding. Over centuries, poets, philosophers, and artists have invoked the labyrinth to express the sense that all inquiry, whether into ancient monuments or the mysteries of existence itself, must reckon with paradox, ambiguity, and the possibility of never finding a final answer. From antiquity onward, Egyptian monuments inspired a fascination with hidden order. The pyramids stood as the supreme emblem of geometry raised to the scale of eternity. Temples and tombs were designed with alignments that tracked celestial cycles. In this context, the labyrinth was imagined as the ultimate expression of encoded meaning, a space whose walls did not merely conceal but also instruct, forcing each visitor to confront a series of thresholds: physical, intellectual, and spiritual. To walk the labyrinth was to enact a ritual of discovery, to submit to a process of unmaking and remaking the self. In late antiquity and the medieval period, Christian writers reinterpreted the labyrinth legend through the lens of theology. Some equated it to the winding path of the soul in search of salvation, a journey marked by confusion and temptation. The sealed chambers represented the secret workings of providence, inaccessible to all but the initiated. Pilgrims who came to Egypt sometimes described their visits to ancient sites as a form of penance or spiritual trial. Even when no physical labyrinth could be found, its idea persisted as a symbol of moral and metaphysical testing. During the Renaissance, the revival of classical texts renewed interest in the labyrinth's allegorical potential. Scholars and esoteric thinkers speculated that the Egyptian labyrinth was designed as a repository of Hermetic wisdom. They imagined its passageways lined with inscriptions recording the hidden laws of nature. In their view, the labyrinth's complexity was not accidental but intentional, a deliberate strategy to keep knowledge safe from the unworthy and accessible only to those willing to dedicate their lives to its pursuit. This vision blurred the distinction between architecture and doctrine. To enter the labyrinth was to enter a living text, each corridor a line to be deciphered. This symbolic reading continued into the modern era. In the 19th century, as Egyptology established itself as a scientific discipline, Romantic poets and philosophers resisted the reduction of monuments to mere data points. For them, the labyrinth retained a mythic dimension. It stood as a rebuke to the idea that everything could be measured and cataloged. In its inaccessibility, they saw proof that some truths resist appropriation, that wonder itself has value beyond any discovery. The labyrinth became a cipher for the limits of reason and the irreducible richness of the past. Even among archaeologists, this perspective has left its mark. Some have argued that the legend of the labyrinth, whether or not it describes a single building, reflects a psychological reality, the human compulsion to imagine hidden orders behind every wall. In this sense, the labyrinth is less a place than a projection, a mirror of the desire to master uncertainty. When explorers uncover a new chamber or detect an anomaly beneath the sand, they do so with the conviction that each clue fits into a larger pattern, waiting to be revealed. This faith in coherence is itself a kind of labyrinth, one that can lead equally to insight or illusion. In popular culture, the labyrinth has never lost its hold. Writers of fiction have transformed it into a stage for adventure and conspiracy. Filmmakers depict it as the ultimate archaeological prize, a place where hidden technologies or world-changing secrets lie dormant. Even video games and graphic novels borrow its imagery, blending ancient architecture with modern quests for discovery. Each reinterpretation extends the labyrinth's symbolic life, making it a touchstone for fantasies of lost wisdom and heroic exploration. Perhaps this symbolic potency explains why the labyrinth endures so stubbornly. Even when surveys return inconclusive data or excavations reveal only rubble, the idea remains intact. It is as if the labyrinth exists on two planes, one in the earth, the other in the imagination. The first can be probed, measured, and debated. The second is impervious to erosion. As long as humans are drawn to mystery, as long as they suspect that behind every known structure lies something more profound, the labyrinth will remain. It is not only a story about Egypt, but a parable of our own hunger for secrets. Chapter 10: The Excavation Debates. As the legend of the Egyptian labyrinth endured through myth and measurement, a deeper tension began to emerge between those who urged immediate excavation and those who cautioned restraint. This debate, which intensified throughout the 20th century and into the 21st, has shaped not only the fate of the supposed labyrinth, but also the philosophy of archaeology itself. Beneath the sands of Hawara and the foundations of Giza lies not just stone, but a question: what should be unearthed, when and why? In the early days of scientific archaeology, the emphasis was firmly on exposure. Scholars like Flinders Petrie operated in a spirit of revelation, stripping away debris to reveal the lines of ancient construction. To them, each wall cleared, each object retrieved, was a victory for truth over time. Petrie's own work at Hawara in 1888 followed this model. He believed in documenting everything, but also in removing layers as efficiently as possible. His excavations uncovered floors, courtyards, and colonnades, fragments he believed belonged to the fabled labyrinth, but even he acknowledged the deeper layers lay beyond his reach. Still, his reports fueled a century of effort. By the mid-1900s, however, attitudes began to shift. Archaeologists grew more aware that excavation was by nature destructive. Once a structure is unearthed and exposed to air, weather, and light, it begins to deteriorate unless properly conserved. Sites excavated too hastily often suffered irreversible damage. At Heuera, much of what Petrie had uncovered was quickly reburied or lost to erosion. The labyrinth, if it had truly been there, was in danger of vanishing even more completely under the very hands trying to save it. This dilemma deepened with the advent of geophysical surveying in the late 20th century. New tools offered a less invasive path: ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity, magnetometry. These technologies allowed researchers to peer beneath the ground without lifting a single stone. In 2008, the Madaha expedition, working with the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities, conducted a series of radar scans at Heuera. The results were dramatic: large subsurface anomalies consistent with foundations and voids. Many observers believe these were the long-sought remains of the labyrinth, but the response from authorities was measured. Without formal excavation and conservation plans in place, no digging would be allowed. The archaeologists found themselves at an impasse. The data suggested something extraordinary, but to prove it, they would have to disrupt the very ground they hoped to study. And without excavation, the findings remained speculative. Meanwhile, public interest surged. Documentaries touted the rediscovery of the labyrinth. Online forums buzzed with theories. Yet the professional community remained cautious. In Egypt, where many sites had suffered from tourism, looting, and hasty digs, the government maintained a firm stance. No further excavation without full international cooperation, conservation strategy, and cultural sensitivity. This led to broader debates about archaeological ethics. Should ancient structures be unearthed to satisfy curiosity or even scholarly pursuit, if doing so risks damage or exploitation? Should the value of mystery be preserved over the clarity of knowledge? In many ways, the labyrinth became a symbol of this tension. It was no longer just a structure to be found, but a test case for how humanity approaches the remnants of its past. Was it better to uncover the truth at all costs, or to protect what remained untouched, even if it meant leaving questions unanswered? Some archaeologists advocated for digital excavation, combining radar data with 3D modeling to reconstruct the labyrinth virtually. This approach allowed for interpretation without intrusion. Researchers could test hypotheses, visualize floor plans, and simulate construction methods, all while the site remained undisturbed. These models, while speculative, offered a new kind of proof, not physical, but conceptual. The labyrinth could exist again, not in stone, but in code. Yet others warned against substituting simulation for evidence. A virtual labyrinth might capture the imagination, but could never replace the value of physical discovery. There are also political currents at play. Egypt's archaeological heritage is vast and often contested. International teams must work within strict regulatory frameworks. Sites like Heuera may not always be prioritized compared to more prominent tourist destinations. Funding, too, shapes decisions. Major digs require support from universities, foundations, and governments. Without strong institutional backing, even the most compelling theories may remain buried. In this landscape, the labyrinth's fate depends not only on where it lies, but on who decides to look and under what terms. Still, the debate has yielded something remarkable: a deeper awareness of what excavation means. No longer is the goal merely to uncover what's hidden, but to do so with respect for context, sustainability, and cultural integrity. The labyrinth may not yet have emerged in full, but in resisting easy answers, it has helped shape a more thoughtful archaeology, one that asks not only what we might find, but what we owe to the past and to the future. The excavation debates continue, shaped by every new scan, every emerging technique, every shift in policy. Whether the labyrinth is ever fully revealed or not, its legend now includes not just the mystery of what lies beneath the earth, but the evolving principles that govern how we seek, protect, and understand that mystery.
Chapter 11: Echoes in Architecture. Even as the physical evidence for the labyrinth remains elusive, its architectural influence has echoed through centuries. The very idea of a monumental, multi-courtyard structure with concealed chambers and passageways inspired generations of builders far beyond Egypt. Whether the labyrinth described by Herodotus and others existed precisely as recorded or was an idealized vision, its legend shaped how later civilizations imagined the possibilities of space, control, and secrecy. In this sense, the labyrinth has always been more than a building. It is an architectural archetype. Elements attributed to the labyrinth: vast halls, colonnaded courtyards, interconnecting corridors, find parallels in Egyptian temple complexes. The Temple of Karnak, though designed for different purposes, shares the principle of nested spaces, each leading deeper into areas reserved for ritual or governance. Similarly, the mortuary temples of the Middle Kingdom, such as those at Deir el-Bahari, incorporate terraces and colonnades arranged in complex plans. Though no one equates these precisely with the labyrinth, they illustrate a cultural disposition toward architectural grandeur and controlled access. The labyrinth legend distilled and exaggerated these features into something singular. Outside Egypt, the concept of the labyrinth resonated with Greek architects and planners. While the famous Cretan labyrinth of Knossos was distinct, it drew upon similar ideas of structured complexity and hidden routes. Roman architects inherited both traditions, embedding labyrinth motifs in mosaics, gardens, and villa floor plans. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, described the Egyptian labyrinth alongside other wonders of the world, reinforcing its status as an exemplar of sophisticated design. For Roman engineers, the labyrinth was not only an object of curiosity, but also a touchstone for architectural ambition. As Roman influence spread, so too did the labyrinth motif. In North Africa and Europe, mosaics depicting labyrinths appeared in public buildings and bathhouses. Some of these geometric designs were purely decorative, while others carried symbolic associations with protection, pilgrimage, or cosmic order. Early Christian art adopted the labyrinth as a metaphor for the path to salvation, a journey whose apparent confusion yielded to clarity at the center. These spiritual interpretations echoed the Egyptian context, where architecture often embodied metaphysical ideas. Even without direct continuity, the Egyptian labyrinth remained part of a shared Mediterranean imaginary. Medieval builders adapted the labyrinth motif to new purposes. Gothic cathedrals incorporated labyrinth designs in their floors, most famously at Chartres. Pilgrims traced these patterns on their knees as acts of devotion. Though different in scale from any Egyptian structure, these designs sustained the association between architecture and spiritual trial. In them, one can glimpse the same fascination with concealed meaning and transformative passage that colored ancient accounts of the labyrinth. The Egyptian original may have been half lost to time, but its conceptual shadow fell across centuries. During the Renaissance, as classical texts were rediscovered, scholars and architects once again looked to Egypt for inspiration. In treatises on architecture, the labyrinth appeared as a case study in both wonder and warning, an example of the extremes to which human ingenuity could reach. Some thinkers celebrated its ambition. Others saw it as an emblem of hubris, an edifice so complex it defeated its makers. This ambivalence carried forward into the Enlightenment, when archaeological expeditions revived interest in Egypt's monuments. The labyrinth, whether real or not, remained a mirror for each age's preoccupations. Modern architects have also drawn on the labyrinth legend. Museums, memorials, and public installations sometimes reference its imagery to evoke mystery and layered experience. The idea that a building could unfold like a riddle, that it could compel visitors to engage both physically and intellectually, owes something to the labyrinth archetype. Even in digital design, the metaphor persists. Software interfaces and data visualizations borrow the language of labyrinths to describe systems that seem opaque and intricate. The legend's endurance attests to its power as an idea as much as a blueprint. These echoes raise an intriguing possibility. Perhaps the labyrinth was never a single site to be excavated, but rather a convergence of architectural tendencies, an ideal distilled from many structures. Over time, Oral accounts and travelers' tales may have condensed them into a single image. The result became a template against which later architecture could be measured. Whether it lay beneath the sands of Ha'era or only in collective imagination, the labyrinth's influence is undeniable. It shaped not just how the ancients built, but how we continue to think about space itself. In this sense, the Egyptian labyrinth remains an unfinished project. Its details are obscured, but its concept lives on, inviting each generation to reimagine what it might have been. Every attempt to reconstruct it, whether through excavation or interpretation, becomes another layer in its evolving history. And in every echo, each building, each pattern, each metaphor, we glimpse the enduring power of an idea whose origin may never be fully retrieved. Chapter 12: The Labyrinth in Myth and Memory. As centuries passed and the sands accumulated, the Egyptian labyrinth crossed the threshold from contested fact into the realm of collective memory. In this space, its outlines became more fluid, its details shaped as much by imagination as by any surviving stone. Ancient writers had already blurred the line between observation and legend, but in the generations that followed, the labyrinth evolved into a myth that reflected each era's preoccupations. This process of transformation, from monument to metaphor, ensured that the labyrinth would endure even when its physical traces remained elusive. Greek historians and geographers were the first to place the labyrinth firmly within a framework of wonder. Herodotus called it surpassing even the pyramids in grandeur. Diodorus Siculus and Strabo repeated these claims, layering their own interpretations atop earlier reports. Each account added flourishes, extra courts, secret chambers, hidden hieroglyphs, until the labyrinth became less a single building than a compendium of marvels. To read these texts is to glimpse how memory expands to fill the spaces left by lost evidence. Roman authors preserved and embellished these traditions. Pliny the Elder described the labyrinth not only as a work of architecture but as an emblem of human ingenuity stretched to its limits. In his telling, it was a monument so ambitious that it ultimately confounded any attempt at mastery. This view, part admiration, part cautionary tale, foreshadowed the labyrinth's later symbolism in European thought. For Pliny's readers, it became a parable of excess, proof that even the most advanced civilizations could build beyond their ability to sustain. In medieval chronicles, the labyrinth acquired new associations. Pilgrims returning from Egypt brought stories that mingled fact with pious speculation. They described vaults filled with pagan idols, corridors so intricate that demons were said to dwell within them, waiting to mislead the unwary. These legends blurred distinctions between geography and morality. The labyrinth stood for the dangers of curiosity untempered by faith. To enter its depths was to risk not just physical disorientation but spiritual peril. Such imagery resonated in an age when exploration itself was often framed as a test of the soul. Renaissance antiquarians, eager to reconcile classical texts with their own rediscoveries, treated the labyrinth as a missing link between Egyptian antiquity and Greco-Roman culture. Artists depicted it as a fantastical palace, blending architectural detail with allegory. In prints and paintings, the labyrinth appeared beside pyramids and obelisks, symbols of a lost golden age. These images shaped European perceptions of Egypt as a land of riddles and hidden knowledge. Even when excavation lagged behind, the idea of the labyrinth acquired an independent reality in the imagination of scholars and collectors. By the Enlightenment, debates about the labyrinth's factual basis had become more rigorous. Some travelers, disillusioned by the difficulty of verifying ancient claims, concluded that the labyrinth had been exaggerated beyond recognition. Others insisted that the fragmentary remains at Ha'era proved its existence. The tension between skepticism and belief mirrored wider currents in the study of antiquity. Where some saw only ruins and speculation, others perceived evidence of lost sophistication, waiting to be reclaimed. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the labyrinth continued to inspire. Writers of fiction reimagined it as a subterranean archive, a place where forgotten scrolls and treasures lay sealed away. Occultists linked it to Hermetic traditions, suggesting that its chambers encoded esoteric truths. In popular culture, the labyrinth's image grew still more vivid, a crypt of ancient knowledge or an elaborate trap built to confound intruders. Each new retelling extended its mythic life, ensuring that it remained part of the shared vocabulary of mystery. This layering of stories and interpretations created a curious paradox. Even as archaeology advanced, the labyrinth's reality became harder to disentangle from its legend. To excavate its foundations was no longer simply to recover a building but to sift through centuries of projection and hope. Each fragment unearthed was weighed not only for what it revealed but for what it failed to confirm. In this way, the labyrinth became an object of perpetual reimagining, a reminder that history is never merely a record of what happened but also a testament to what people have wished to believe. Today, the labyrinth endures in scholarship and art alike. It continues to symbolize the interplay of concealment and revelation, the enticement of the hidden path. Whether it lies beneath the silt of Ha-era or within the layered archives of human memory, it challenges each generation to confront its own fascination with the unknown. In this sense, the labyrinth has outlived any single structure. It is not simply a relic but an enduring myth, one that remains potent precisely because it has never been wholly resolved. Chapter 13: The Modern Search. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the quest for the Egyptian labyrinth entered a new phase, one shaped as much by technology as by imagination. No longer dependent solely on ancient texts or chance discoveries, researchers turned to methods that could peer beneath the ground without displacing a single stone. The modern search has blended meticulous science with a persistent conviction that the truth of the labyrinth still lies waiting under the sands of Egypt. The first stirrings of renewed exploration began in the late 19th century, when Flinders Petrie conducted the initial scientific excavations at Ha-era. Petrie uncovered parts of a vast funerary complex, courtyards, walls, and causeways, but even he acknowledged that much remained hidden. His sketches and reports became the baseline for later expeditions. In the decades that followed, other Egyptologists visited the site, measuring the remnants, photographing walls and masonry, and debating whether these traces matched the descriptions in Herodotus. But without more advanced tools, much of the speculation remained inconclusive. By the latter half of the 20th century, technological advances transformed the field. Aerial photography, remote sensing, and geophysical surveys promised to reveal subterranean structures without the destructive consequences of full-scale excavation. As interest in Egyptian heritage grew worldwide, funding for new investigations became more accessible. Archaeologists formed international teams, combining expertise in geophysics, conservation, and Egyptology. The labyrinth emerged as both a tantalizing goal and a test case for applying cutting-edge techniques to ancient mysteries. One of the most significant efforts occurred in 2008, when the Madaha expedition, a collaboration between Belgian and Egyptian researchers, conducted extensive ground-penetrating radar surveys at Ha-era. The scans revealed large subsurface anomalies, geometric patterns suggesting walls, chambers, and voids stretching beneath the site. Some researchers interpreted these anomalies as evidence of the labyrinth's foundations, confirming descriptions from ancient texts. Others advised caution, noting that natural geological formations or later construction phases could produce similar readings. These results sparked excitement among enthusiasts and professionals alike. News outlets reported that the labyrinth might finally have been found, though Egyptian authorities stressed that no excavation would proceed without rigorous plans for conservation and cultural stewardship. After generations of erosion and plundering, any disturbance of the site risked irreversible loss. The tension between revelation and preservation resurfaced with new urgency. How to balance the hunger for discovery against the responsibility to protect what survives. Meanwhile, advances in digital modeling opened alternative paths to exploration. Researchers began integrating radar data with 3D visualization software to create virtual reconstructions of the labyrinth's possible layouts. These models, while speculative, allowed scholars to test architectural hypotheses, simulating how corridors and chambers might have connected, how load-bearing walls supported ceilings, and how processions could have moved through the space. For the first time, it became possible to walk through a theoretical labyrinth without touching a single brick. Even as technology expanded possibilities, debates persisted over interpretation. Some Egyptologists argued that the anomalies detected by radar were consistent with nothing more than collapsed mudbrick structures from later periods. Others maintained that the scale and pattern of the readings closely matched classical accounts. In the absence of excavation, each position remained provisional, sustained by evidence that was both compelling and ambiguous. This ambiguity kept the labyrinth in a state of suspended reality, neither wholly confirmed nor definitively disproven. Beyond archaeology, the labyrinth continued to inspire popular culture. Documentaries, novels, and online forums revived fascination with hidden chambers and lost knowledge. Tourists visiting Ha-era gazed across the featureless plain, imagining elaborate halls buried beneath their feet. Some enthusiasts proposed that the labyrinth held secret archives or ritual artifacts capable of rewriting the history of ancient Egypt. These more extravagant claims often overshadowed the careful, incremental work of professional researchers. Yet they also fueled public interest, ensuring that the labyrinth remained a living topic rather than a forgotten curiosity. As the 21st century advanced, new technologies promised to deepen understanding. Satellite imagery with higher resolution, refined magnetometry, and advanced algorithms for processing radar data offered tools that Petrie could never have imagined. Each innovation brought the possibility of clarifying what lay below. Yet with each advance, the same dilemma recurred: whether to proceed cautiously, preserving the site for future generations, or to risk disturbance in the hope of definitive answers. The modern search thus stands as a testament to both human ingenuity and restraint. It demonstrates how far technology has come and how much mystery can persist even in an age of unprecedented data. Whether the labyrinth will ever be excavated, whether its chambers will see light again after millennia of darkness, remains uncertain. For now, it remains poised between the known and the unknown, a reminder that some questions endure precisely because they cannot be answered too easily. Chapter 14: The Labyrinth as Cultural Mirror. Beyond its material existence, if it ever existed as described, the labyrinth has long functioned as a mirror in which cultures have glimpsed their own ambitions and anxieties. Each era projected its values onto the legend, shaping the labyrinth into a vessel for hopes and fears that went far beyond architecture. This interplay between myth and meaning ensured the labyrinth's endurance in human consciousness, regardless of whether its halls lay buried beneath the Egyptian plain. In antiquity, Greek observers saw the labyrinth through a lens of awe and rivalry. Herodotus, Diodorus, and Strabo placed it among the marvels of the known world, surpassing the pyramids in complexity and splendor. In their descriptions, the labyrinth became a testament to Egyptian ingenuity, proof that civilization could marshal order over chaos, creating an edifice whose measured arrangement was itself a declaration of power. To them, the labyrinth was a challenge and an inspiration, an example of how knowledge and ambition could produce wonders beyond ordinary comprehension. Later Roman accounts reflected a shift in perspective. Pliny the Elder and other authors emphasized not only the labyrinth's grandeur but also its inaccessibility. They presented it as a place whose secrets were intentionally obscured, a repository of hidden knowledge and elite privilege. This duality, celebration of achievement coupled with suspicion of concealment, mirrored Roman attitudes toward the older civilizations they both admired and conquered. The labyrinth became an emblem of the idea that knowledge itself could be a kind of power, to be guarded and rationed rather than shared freely. During the Middle Ages, the labyrinth took on new layers of symbolism. In a world shaped by religious orthodoxy, it became a metaphor for spiritual peril and salvation. Pilgrims told stories of a subterranean palace where pagan idols lingered and false gods demanded tribute. To enter its passages without proper faith was to risk both physical entrapment and damnation. The labyrinth thus became an allegory, a caution against curiosity unmoored from piety. This transformation reflected broader medieval preoccupations with the limits of human understanding and the dangers of pride. In the Renaissance, when classical texts were rediscovered, the labyrinth returned to prominence as a symbol of artistic and intellectual aspiration. Illustrators and architects reconstructed it in their treatises, blending fragments of ancient description with Renaissance ideals of proportion and harmony. The labyrinth's complex geometry came to embody a tension between mastery and mystery. Even as scholars aspired to chart every chamber, they sensed that some part of the structure, and the civilization that built it, would always remain just beyond their grasp. The Enlightenment added yet another layer. In an age that prized reason and empirical evidence, the labyrinth was reinterpreted as an example of the dangers of excessive ambition. Writers speculated that its builders might have exhausted resources or overreached their capabilities, creating a monument whose maintenance proved unsustainable. The labyrinth thus became a parable about the limits of human endeavor, a reminder that even the most advanced societies could be undone by their own designs. In the 19th and 20th centuries, as archaeology became professionalized, the labyrinth inspired fresh inquiry. It was no longer simply a symbol but a problem to be solved. Expeditions to Ha'era sought to reconcile ancient testimony with measurable evidence. The labyrinth stood for the promise of scientific discovery, that patient effort and careful method could strip away myth to reveal truth. But it also remained a magnet for speculation and fantasy. Popular accounts often outpaced scholarly consensus, reflecting a persistent longing for the miraculous. Today, the labyrinth continues to serve as a cultural mirror. In scholarship, it represents the interplay between data and interpretation, how evidence can be shaped by expectation. In popular imagination, it evokes the allure of the undiscovered, a place where the past remains alive and waiting. The labyrinth's elusiveness resonates in an era fascinated by hidden histories and alternative narratives. It stands for the idea that not everything can or should be known at once, that some mysteries are essential to the human experience. This persistence reflects a deeper truth. Whether built precisely as Herodotus described or remembered through centuries of embellishment, the labyrinth endures because it encapsulates something universal: the tension between curiosity and caution, mastery and humility, revelation and restraint. Each generation reconfigures these tensions according to its own priorities. The labyrinth is, in this sense, less a fixed structure than an evolving reflection of how humanity grapples with the unknown. So it is that the labyrinth, real or imagined, continues to shape the ways we understand the past and ourselves. Its legend invites us to consider what we seek when we search for ancient truths, and what we might risk or gain in the process. In this mirror, every viewer sees a slightly different image, each one tinted by time, culture, and desire, and that, perhaps, is the labyrinth's most enduring secret.
Chapter 15. Enduring Questions. To speak of the Egyptian labyrinth is to speak not only of architecture, but of an idea that has resisted time. Long after its stones were scattered or buried beneath centuries of Nile silt, the structure, real or imagined, remains suspended in human thought, a shape shifting between memory, myth, and longing. Even now, with advanced tools and expansive historical knowledge, the labyrinth's true nature eludes complete resolution. That elusiveness is not a failure of discovery. It is the very condition of the question. It may have stood at Ha'era, just as Herodotus claimed, beside the pyramid of Amenemhat III. There, its columns might once have supported a roof so vast that sunlight never reached the floor. In its halls, perhaps priests moved silently from chamber to chamber, their steps known only to initiates. Or perhaps it was never quite so grand, a more modest series of courtyards and storehouses whose scale impressed only by contrast with later ruins. Or perhaps it never stood at all, not in stone, but in story. And yet, for something so uncertain, the labyrinth has generated centuries of certainty. Scholars have debated its blueprint. Explorers have measured its alleged footprint. Artists have drawn it from imagination, and travelers have crossed oceans to find it. That collective pursuit speaks to more than mere curiosity. It points to a hunger for meaning. The labyrinth is not just a building. It is a question carved into the ground and echoed across centuries. Can we truly recover the whole shape of the past? Or must we learn to live inside the puzzle? Its image has been evoked in libraries and data networks, in mazes of bureaucracy and memory palaces. Each generation finds in it something of itself. To those who fear loss, the labyrinth is a hidden archive. To those who fear confusion, it is a warning. To those who seek knowledge, it is a gate, one whose key may lie buried or never have existed. Like the ruins themselves, the metaphor outlasts certainty. And still, the ground waits. Beneath the fields of Hoira, beneath the crop lines and the quiet wind, the soil bears its riddles. Ground-penetrating radar hints at shapes that resemble corridors and walls. But without excavation, the echoes remain faint. Future scholars, perhaps braver or more equipped than those of today, may one day uncover what time has not entirely erased. Or they may confirm what some already suspect, that the labyrinth was never a single place, but many places blurred together by imagination. Perhaps that is the most appropriate ending, that the labyrinth resists finality. Its story coils back on itself, just like the halls it's said to contain. Every new theory loops us to an older one. Every excavation opens as many questions as it attempts to settle. In that way, it fulfills the very idea of a labyrinth, not just as a physical space, but as a form of thought. And so we come to the end, or rather, a turn. The Egyptian labyrinth, part ruin, part legend, part mirror, remains a symbol of humanity's search for origins, for meaning, for design in the dust of ages. Whether beneath the sands or within the structure of stories, it remains. Always half-lit, always waiting. Thank you for spending this time exploring the hidden corridors of the Egyptian labyrinth with me. Whether it stood in stone or only in the imagination, its story reminds us how much of the past still lies beneath the surface, waiting quietly to be discovered. May this tale inspire you to keep asking questions and to find wonder in the mysteries that endure. Until next time, take care, and may your own journeys through history and beyond be filled with curiosity and calm.